For 15 years, DJ Bob has been your go-to source for pop culture, past and present. We eat, sleep, and breathe pop culture, just like you. He's interviewed countless fascinating people, from well-known names to everyday heroes.
DJ Bob connects with his guests on a personal level, exploring their stories, passions, and challenges.
He's not just interviewing, he's building a community of like-minded, inspiring, driven, and talented individuals.
Join DJ Bob as he delves into the world of entertainment and the conversations that matter on all levels. This is the DJ Bob Show. Roll it.
Friends, we are back again. I feel weird introducing this, given it is not my show. But here we are again. My name is Matt Bingel. Delighted to be with you again. We have a returning guest for this one. If you folks remember, or some time ago, not long ago actually, we had an editor here who released a book called The 501 Essential Albums of the 1990s. This time around, we're going back a whole decade. He has released a new book. You guessed it, the 501 Essential Albums of the 1980s. And boy, you thought the 90s were diverse. Wait till you hear about the 80s. Gary Graff, wonderful to have you back.
Great to be back. Thank you very much for it.
No problem. And the reason why I had Matt introduce it is because the minute we heard about this next installment, Matt was like, we're jumping on it. I believe you teased it on our last chat. So
Yeah.
we're happy to have you here.
Yeah. I'm very happy to be back. And the 80s connect with a lot of people. They still do, 40 odd years later.
Well, how I want to start this conversation is probably not where we were expecting to. And the 80s was a big moment for the movie soundtrack. And a lot of those are showcased in the book. Do you kind of want to go into that a little bit?
Well, sure. I mean, and that's a lot of people I find are gravitating to the soundtracks because they did have such a great impact in the 80s. It really started in the 70s, of course. Saturday Night Fever, and then you had Nine Tonight, and I'm sorry, not Nine Tonight, but Urban Cowboy, and you had a couple of soundtracks that really introduced a whole new synthesis and symbiosis between the movie industry and the music industry, where one was helping to promote the other. And by the time we get into the 80s, they're ready to do this, even more so. So we got Flashdance, and we got The Breakfast Club, and we got Footloose, and Pretty in Pink, and 16 Candles, and all the Hope Floats, even all these movie soundtracks, and they were successful twofold. One is they gave artists another avenue in which to put songs, and another way to get exposed, and a very potent way to get exposed. More people, were going to the movies perhaps than were necessarily consuming music or watching MTV or listening to the radio or going to concerts. On the other hand, for the movies, these songs and their accompanying videos became nonstop commercials for the movies they were in. So it really was the proverbial one hand washing the other, and 1 + 1 equaling more than 2.
Absolutely. And the reason why I bring that up is because we talk about the Footloose soundtrack. People don't realize how many singles, even if they weren't necessarily radio singles, they were out in the ether so much that people my generation, of the 90s generation, know them and love them and absorb them just as much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just that album alone. You had the song Footloose, Kenny Loggins, Let's Hear It for the Boy, Denise Williams, Holding Out for a Hero, Bonnie Tyler, Dancing in the Sheets, Shalimar, that's and And that's just right off the tip of it. And then you had virtually all the other, I think it was 7 of the 9 songs on that soundtrack were released as singles. And, a good many of them wound up in the top 10. So, and they, that was among the most successful of the soundtracks. The Breakfast Club didn't necessarily put that many hits on the chart, but it still had a substantial number of significant singles, not the least. And that's a soundtrack that turned 40 this year. And, not the least of those songs was Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. So yeah, these soundtracks were little hit factories unto themselves.
Yeah, I kind of want to start off there. So, Matt Bingle, is there anything you'd like to add or want to jump in here?
Well, you want to talk about movie soundtracks. I specifically want to bring up 1984, as that was a huge year for movies and their soundtracks. You had Ghostbusters and that title with Ray Parker Jr., and you had especially Purple Rain. I mean, Purple Rain was a phenomenon. I mean, this was pretty much after Michael Jackson's Thriller, which was already a phenomenon of itself. But Purple Rain really stood out to me with, as we talked last time, I'm a huge kind of Billboard nerd lately. Purple Rain was number one on the album chart for like 24 weeks, like the last 22 weeks of 84 and the first 2 weeks of 1985. You don't get an album like that anymore, people. You really don't. But again, like 84, 85 was like, and even in the like 86 and 87 were like peak years for movie soundtracks, I think. Because again, yeah, Ghostbusters, as you mentioned, Breakfast Club, and I do agree that they both went, kind of hand in hand, I think.
Very much so. I mean, well, it's interesting because Purple Rain's a bit of an outlier, and that was as much of an album as it was a movie soundtrack. If Purple Rain had just come out without a movie, it would still have been the next Prince album. But it would not have done that well because you had this great tie-in with as they say, a major motion picture. So, that one just made the other that much bigger. And then they kept driving each other. Whereas when you look at, the soundtracks for Footloose or for Ghostbusters or anything else in that prime period, these were jukeboxes, these were multi-artists, songs. The big hits were usually commissioned specifically for the films. And then the movie and the film fed off each other like that. Whereas Purple Rain, like I said, could have just as easily been Prince's next album and didn't necessarily have to have a movie to go with it, but was that much more popular because it did.
One of the things that I meant to ask you is in the late 80s, early 90s, there's a lot of overlap. And honestly, in the late 70s into the 80s, there's a lot of overlap as far as sonic style. When you and your team, because it isn't just you crafting this epic list, was there ever a moment where you're looking at these albums and you're like, wait, that was an 80s record? I thought it was late 70s or early 90s just because of sonic sound?
It wasn't even so much the sound, just our sense of history. And the biggest one that happened to was the Clash, London Calling. Everybody kind of assumed that was going to be in the 80s book, but it came, it actually came out in 1979, granted in December 1979. So there was a little bit of discussion there about, well, do we just put it in the 80s book because it only came out with 2 weeks left in the 70s? But no, it was recorded and made in 79, so that's where we kept it. We didn't think about it so much in sonic terms, although we do, you do as writers and historians and observers, you do hear just what you're talking about, the sonic evolution, the sensibility evolution, and not just in production, but in compositional style, songwriting. Too, you can hear an evolution that does start in the back half of the previous decade, and by the end of the decade, you're starting to hear the hints of the next decade to come, without a doubt.
Yeah, and the last time we spoke, you brought up that there were albums that you wouldn't necessarily deem as a quote unquote classic because it wasn't, something that you necessarily gravitated towards. Was there anything like that where it was kind of not a fight, but was there a lot of like, well, I don't know, like, was there anything like that?
Oh, there were fights. Don't worry. These books exist to have fights. So, given my own taste or others, personal taste, there probably are a number of albums that are not Gary Graff's essential albums of the 80s. But when we put that aside, and we all had to put that aside, all of myself and all of the contributors, to say, okay, but let's look at it in the context of the decade and what's important. What was essential to that decade. And sure as shooting, Poison's open up and say, needs to be in there. Skid Row's self-titled album needs to be in there. A number of Milli Vanilli needs to be in there. That one, for reasons that go beyond the
Yeah,
music. But if we're going to tell the story of the decade, then these are albums that do belong in there. And so that's really how the kind of process of selection is made.
for sure. And I'm assuming that this book was crafted in tandem with the 90s book. How much
They,
overlap
well,
was
they were
there?
back. Yeah, they were back to back. So I guess while we were writing the final parts of the Essential 90s book, I was starting to get the spreadsheet together for the Essential 80s book, and we were starting to bounce that back and forth. So one flowed into the next, and it really was about 18 months of consistent work on between the two books.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that they're there because it is really what you're doing here is really it's not even just a coffee table book of just a book to just have. It's really a great resource as like the cream of the crop as far as what exemplified this decade and what really gave it its edge, what gave it its sensibility. So I love these books you're doing, and I hope there's more.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I also I mean, they're heavy enough to be rodent killers if you need them, or door stops. But that's one thing about motor books, Quarto Press. I think this is the fifth or sixth book I've done with them, and their design staff is just
They're amazing.
excellent. Yeah, all their books, that come out are just, they really are very artfully done. So it's a pleasure, and that helps knowing when you're doing the writing and the editing. It helps to know in the back of your mind that boy, this is going to look good. And certainly when we were getting into the latter half of doing the 80s book, we did see the 90s book already, and that's some good rocket fuel to kind of know what the book's going to look like, and have the confidence that it's really going to be a special looking physical product.
For sure. And I'm gonna pass it over to Hammer to see if he's got it.
I feel like with this book, so you obviously couldn't fit every song in every album in their mother in the book. How were you able to narrow it down to the essential albums?
Well, we put out the word to the artist to send us bribes. Okay, and whoever sent us the most money got in the book. It's that easy. No, it's the product of a lot of discussions, and I use the word discussion euphemistically. Some discussions were louder than others, or more passionate than others, and I'm sure I talked about this the last time I was on the show, but it happened with this book too. A number of us are daily practicing music journalists here in Detroit, and we'd often end up at the same concert together. and usually our seats are together in the same row. And in between acts, we'd be talking about the books and the lists, and we'd be engaging in these euphemistic discussions. And the people around us would be gesturing to security, like, "Can you? These guys are going to start swinging at each other." As the discussions got more passionate. But really what we did, we created the long list, the spreadsheet that had about 2,600 titles on it. And I would say, of 501, about half are no-brainers. They're the Purple Rains and the Born in the USAs and the Like a Virgins and the Thrillers and those type of albums. And then the rest are really us discussing them and hashing it back and forth and chopping it up a little bit about, okay, what makes this, what does make this album essential? Which REM albums are we going to include because they were so prolific during the 80s? Talking Heads, Prince for that matter. You had a lot of bands that were putting out albums every year and they were all consistently
Yeah.
good. So
Mhm.
and it's just discussion and ultimately I have to make the call. But a lot of good and sometimes very loud input.
It was funny when Matt when Matt Bingel and I got the book, we were looking at it, kind of, prepping for this, and Matt was having an argument with me about why Prince's controversy isn't in there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
good.
a
I
lot
mean,
of,
I mean, we
yeah,
live
well,
we live for the arguments.
we
When you
do.
when you do a book like this, as long as we all come to the correct conclusion that we're right, it's fine. But so something like Controversy, for instance, we knew there'd be a lot of Prince, and he has 4 albums in here, which is as many as any other artist had. And then it became a question of, okay, so which were the less essential of his catalog? And I felt like Controversy was one. I thought Dirty Mind, first of all, that introduced us to the Prince we would come to know and love. And of course, you're going to have 1999 and Purple Rain and Sign of the Times. These
Of
are
course.
these are so Controversy wasn't as consistent as any of those albums. Some great
That's fair.
songs,
Yeah,
but not as
great
consistent.
songs.
Same thing with Around the World. Same thing with Around the World in a Day.
Right.
Okay,
That's fair.
Raspberry Beret, one of his best songs ever, arguably one of the best pop songs in history. But
Oh,
the
yeah.
album itself wasn't as consistent, therefore not as essential.
Yeah, I understood why Around the World in a Day wasn't there, but it did quite surprise me, given the political drive that it had at the time.
Yeah,
That's why I was kind of surprised it wasn't there, because you had like the Smiths before Morrissey and his political rants,
right.
but
And it really wasn't about politics. I mean, it was more
no,
about the consistency of
right.
the album and the music. And Controversy has some super high points and some points that are not as
Yeah.
that don't gravitate to the high points of Dirty Mind or Purple Rain or 1999.
Hmm.
I'm just curious, did you get feedback from any of the artists? Like, have any of the artists seen the book? And
The only ones are Bare Naked Ladies. I shouldn't say that. Bare Naked Ladies, actually it was very sweet. One of their members, they got the 90's book because of course they're in it a couple times. And they did a video, on social media, a video for their tour, and they were showing what they have in each of their road cases. And one of the guys pulled out the 90's book as his tour reading, which was very sweet. The band Sponge posted about it. Don Was, who of course was not was, and then Grammy Award-winning producer of Bonnie Raitt's Nick of Time's Cosmic Thing, for the B-52s. He had me on his NPR radio show, to talk about it. So yeah, we have gotten feedback. We really didn't work it to the artists a whole lot.
But
But
if it gets to them, great. If
yeah, if
it
it gets to
gets,
them, great. I hear from some of their representatives, and they're pleased. A few of them want to pick fights about which albums we chose, and So I'm always happy. I'm always happy to have that discussion.
So, what's the ratio between friendly conversation and argument, or then friendly argument?
I think it's almost 100% friendly
Okay,
argument.
good.
The nice thing I'm able to say coming out of these books is it's a pleasure to do it with friends and colleagues and even somebody I happen to live with. And it's nice to come out of the book saying they're still my friends and colleagues and she still lives with me. Now, did I get to know the comfortable parts of our stone patio some nights? Yeah, perhaps. After some of our discussions, but no, we the camaraderie and the team effort in these books has really been special. We do some book events together, or we're on the radio together, and there's a great repartee between all of us. I mean, these are people who not only are colleagues and we're at concerts together with, but some of us play golf together. A couple are on my softball team. We some of the out of towners and I have great history hanging out at South by Southwest or tour opening concerts, and we know each other's kids, we know our pets, we so and I think it comes across too. I tried to edit it so it would, but I think when you read the book, I think it does read like a bunch of music geeks spitballing what they think about
Yeah, where
all these albums.
it's like a big hangout. That's the vibe
Yeah.
that's the vibe it gives off. So I have to ask you, is there a 70s book in the works?
There's a 70s spreadsheet right now. Hoping for a green light for that book if all the good people listening buy their Essential 80s and Essential 90s books. That'll certainly help the cause, to be direct about that. But no, the 70s is the next one in the crosshairs. That spreadsheet is already full and getting fuller as I pass it around. So it'll be interesting. Same kind of thing we were talking about Prince. Which Led Zeppelin album do you leave out, or do you? You know, you think about all the bands, all the Journey albums there were during the 70s, all the Santana albums. There were just all the bands. 70s will likely be a little more rock and R&B oriented because rap had not really become a major force. There'll be some good country in there. Not as much electronic because again that was something that started to rear its
But
head
it'll
during the
be it'll
80s.
be interesting, and I hope we could get to see a green light.
Yeah,
Because
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean we are too, believe me. And hopefully one day we'll do a 60s book and that's probably the last decade you could sustain a book like this for. I mean,
Yeah.
they put out albums in the 50s and the 40s, but probably not 501 and also the albums 501 that were essential and also the album really became our primary way of experiencing and consuming music during the 60s and went through to the 90s, whereas as we talked about last time, come the end of the 90s and into the 21st century and file sharing and streaming and Napster and all of that, we really are not an album world anymore like we were in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I think 501 Essential of the 2000s will be very interesting because I think it'll something like that'll be a revelation that oh yeah there were albums during that decade and good ones that still need to be heard.
so are there any good albums from the last couple of, let's say, year or so that you're really into?
Oh, they're good albums, really from the last couple of weeks. Even we just had a new album from Duran Jones come out that, great band, soul, kind of contemporary soul, but still with an old soul kind of feel. That was called Flowers. Fishbone had a new album out called
Yeah.
Stockholm Syndrome. Dropkick Murphys has a new album coming out on July 4th. So yeah, I mean, good albums are still being made out there. They're just not as visible because unless it's like Taylor Swift releasing it, we don't consume them as albums like we did before.
You really got to dig for them.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
read, I mean and that's the other thing. We're in a world now where everything is brought to the consumer. When we're talking about, especially the 70s and 80s, and to a degree in the 90s, if you were a music fan, you worked to discover music. It wasn't the internet, it was groups of friends. It was going to the record
Or
store
you had to call
and,
the radio
and
station
hanging
and
out.
you had to
Yeah.
call the radio station and ask what song you just heard because they didn't back talk, they didn't talk
Yeah.
over it, so you didn't know what it was.
Yeah. But it was a very active, proactive, investment in being a music fan. And now it is, at the risk of sounding like that guy, get off my lawn. It's a more passive exercise. You go on to your choice of social media or your streaming service, hit a playlist and listen to a bunch of music. And if you discover something great, if it sends you down the rabbit hole, great, but it doesn't happen all that often. So it's just an entirely different sensibility now.
My final question before we wrap here is what is the most, you're two books deep into this kind of world of the essential albums and all this. What's the funniest piece of feedback that you've heard from a reader about something that they had to say, or what's the funniest or best piece of feedback you've heard that
Yeah,
sticks out?
that's a really good question. I mean, I would, just because we're talking about the 80s, I would have to say the Milli Vanilli discussion has
Oh.
has been the most intriguing. I mean, I do get a lot of, it's like, really, Milli Vanilli, and I got it, and I expected it when we selected that album to be in the book. But the rationale is this: A, forgetting everything that happened around it, all the controversies and everything. Those are good pop songs.
Yeah,
It's a really good pop record. It's well written, it's well
Mhm.
sung, albeit not by the guys who are on the cover, or who were on stage. It's well produced. So that's one thing. And then the rest of the story, the fraud, that makes it essential to understanding what happened in the 80s, because that raised an awareness of, wait a minute, what is going on behind the scenes? Who is the man behind the glass, or who is the wonderful Wizard of Oz in these scenarios? And it raised our awareness about producers and production and what went on in the studio. And we started to know all sorts, as music fans, we started to learn all sorts of terms about how music was being made and produced in the studio. So that's why that's an essential album, and belongs in there, even if you roll your eyes because certain aspects of it were fraudulent.
I mean, Blame It on the Rain is one of my favorite
Yeah, good
songs.
good tunes. You can't argue that. I don't think you can argue that they were good tunes. So, and like I say, the rest of the story is what makes it, you know, is what makes it essential. We get a lot of stuff like, okay, why did we pick, Joan Jett's Bad Reputation and not the album that had I Love Rock and Roll on it, or why did we leave out this REM album and pick this one, or leave out this Hall and Oates album and pick these two, and
Yeah,
we have
Mhm.
we have good explanations for all of it.
Yeah.
Certainly.
and there's that disclaimer at the first page of the book. Like
Yeah, but
this book might cause arguments.
yeah, in the 90s book, that was it. It was, these are books that are designed to cause arguments. And we're
And that
and we're
applies here. That applies
That
here.
definitely applies
And
here.
applies to everybody. And listen, we're all music geeks and pop culture geeks. We like nothing better than a good argument.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nature of the beast.
Nope. You can't talk about the 80s and not talk about MTV,
Well, right.
because that was came around in 81. Of course, he had, of course, the first 24 hours, but that too could be essential in and of itself. I mean, this was a revelation. I mean,
Yeah.
especially in 81 when it premiered.
It's referenced quite a bit, as you'd imagine, in the book
Mm-hmm.
from the introduction throughout the book. And, the thing that MTV did was it created for a moment there a global consensus about what music was popular, about what music was important. And for a minute there, we were all music fans. We still had our tribes, but somebody who was into Metallica Kill 'Em All knew what Purple Rain was, probably had heard the songs and understood that it was popular and it was significant, even if it wasn't their bag. And that's really MTV really democratized the music community. And we were all kind of together in the same boat, even if we were manning different oars as it were. And so, yeah, you can't overstate the impact that had.
And you can't. I mean, all this stuff that we're talking about is referenced in this book at one point or another. So, where can people grab this book? Where can people find it?
Well, wherever books are sold, and I always put in a plug for our independent bookstores and sellers. They of course need and deeply appreciate your business. You can get them, again, wherever books are sold. If anyone's in the Detroit area and sees me driving around, they can honk, and I do have them in the trunk of my car. So we can even sell it to you direct from the source.
That's awesome. And of course, social media is a big thing for you. Where can people find you there?
You can find me. It's Gary Graff on Music on Facebook, Graff on Music on Twitter, Real Graff on Music on Instagram, and Graff on Music on Blue Sky.
Well, again, thank you so much for always chatting with us and being a constant support to what we do and what we're doing here. We appreciate you so much.
No, it's my
Congrats.
pleasure. Believe me,
Congrats.
it's totally my pleasure. So we'll anytime.
We'll catch up soon. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yes, take care.
Bye.